In this episode, we are going to cover a hottest system design topic, which is snake and ladder game. So this is one of the most popular interview question as well. So welcome back to Chakde System Design series. Going forward, we are going to cover the high level and low level design. Not limited to that, we are also going to cover the thought process behind designing the high level and low level designs. So there are so many interesting things and surprises waiting for you in this video. So keep watching this video till the end. And before we move on, don't forget to like and subscribe. Let's get started. What comes to our mind when we talk about building a snake ladder game? So just give a thought, pause the video for 10 seconds and come back. Okay. If I have to develop, generally what it comes, I will use React. I will write a loop. I will create a row. I will have some columns and I'm ready for my snake ladder game to play around. Okay. Now, maybe can we dive more into the architecture or HLD level? Yeah, why not? I can definitely. So when it comes to the architecture and LLD, HLD basically, what we think? Okay, I will be using React. Okay, state management I can do using Redux. That's good enough. Now, how I will have my folder structure? I will have a SRC. Inside SRC, I will be having multiple components. Then I will have hooks. Redux, I can have my services also. There will be some utility for common operation. There will be some stylings I will be keeping into that. Asset for images and other sort of thing. I will be having definitely making API calls, so I can keep a API folder. There will be multiple routes. I can have a routes. There will be shared components as well. I can create that. There can be some commons that I wanted to share between multiple components. Okay. There can be a constant. Okay. And definitely if I'm using TypeScript, I can use types. I can use some config also. So there are so many things that I can use in my folder structure. Not bad. Okay. Then what about the LLD? Okay. Yeah, I can definitely tell the LLD. So how it covers. When it comes to the LLD, the first thing which comes to our mind, I will take a boilerplate. Like I will use either the CRA in order to set up my React boilerplate, or I will use Next boilerplate or Angular boilerplate or whatever framework or library we wanted to use upon, right? Then we'll list down the components that we wanted to develop. We will implement each of these components, like we have a board component and multiple components, right? Then we will render it using the map, where a map having a logic to iterate through the rows and columns in order to develop it, right? Then we will try to add the snake and ladder, place those things and dice in the game. Then we'll have some state management so that we can manage the state of these items, or you can say the dice and everything. Then we'll have some actions in order to coordinate, and then we'll have some stylings in order to style and make it very beautiful. Okay, this is how we think, and this is what comes to our mind whenever a problem statement is given to us. Is this a right approach? Just take a pause. Just think about that. No, that's not a right approach in order to approach any of the high level design or the low level design. Then what is the right way to approach any of the system design round? So what is wrong with the approach that we discussed? Let's talk about that in more detail. System design, right? There are certain phases of thinking process about the system design, which we have already covered in previous videos, but let's quickly jump around that. First, requirement. Why? If you don't know what need to be built, what you are going to build, right? You can't solve a problem unless you know the problem better. Second, like within a requirement, there are two type of thing. One, which is required from the business or from the product, and second, what are the technical requirement that you have, right? Which is functional and non-functional requirement, right? Second is prioritization. You have to understand you can't build everything, not even in the interview, not even in the real world, right? You have to phase out certain things in a different you can say phases, which is very important. Third is you have to come up with the HLD, which is high level design, and also with the tech choices that you are going to make in order to achieve that. Fourth is coming up with your interfaces, which is very, very important, or you can say your LLD, right? Now, fifth comes to your thinking about the technology that you are going to use in order to build. If it is like React or Angular, whatever it is, you might be thinking about using like component architecture, and finally the implementation part, right? These are certain ways, certain thought process, which is very, very important when you think about any system design. Not limited to the interviews, but also in the practical life when you develop any software or any application or any feature that you are going to develop, right? Which is very, very important. So let's dive into these one by one. Let's talk about the functional requirement of a snake and ladder game, right? So whenever it comes to the functional requirement, you should always think from a user perspective, right? I am a user, how I am going to use this system, which is very important. So if you are able to think from a user perspective, you will be able to think and come up with lot of, you can say there will be lot of functional requirement that you will be able to achieve and thought through. Okay, now, especially when it comes to the game, it's always to become a child. Like think from a child, the for the first time when you actually started learning the snake and ladder game or any game in particular, right? What we do, we have lot of question basically, right? What are those questions? Let's try to put down those questions, and maybe that may be helpful for us in order to come up with final functional requirement. First, how to start this game? Is there any start button, or how should I start this game? Second, like from where it is going to start? There are so many numbers. From what is the entry point? Now, what will happen if I roll the dice? I will get some number. What will happen with those number? Now, there are some snake and ladder. What will happen if I reach at the bottom of any of these ladder? Right? So it will help. Will it help me to climb the ladder? Or what will happen if I come at the mouth of a snake? Will it bite me? What will happen if it bite me? Will I have to go to the tail and I have to start it again, right? Okay, after all such question, what comes? Okay, now I'm playing this game, but how I will come to know that if I am a winner or other player is a winner, right? What is the winning condition? So what are the different rules of that particular game is something that we try to understand, and that what becomes our functional requirement, right? So whenever we say functional requirement, so mostly, right, as we said about like how our game will start, from where the game will start in terms of like there are so many numbers, right? What will happen when we throw the dice? What will happen if we reach to the bottom of the ladder? What will happen basically when we come to the like mouth of a snake, right? What will be the behavior? Who will be the winner? Like till what time this game is going to work? How many players basically can play this particular game, right? So many things comes to our mind basically whenever we talk about snake and ladder game, right? Or any game in general, as we said. So always think from a user, always think from a like as a child when it comes to a game, right? And think about how I can basically play around this game. And certainly you will come up with so many interesting functional requirement, and then you can get started and become an engineer back in order to solve the technical challenges. So let's talk about the non-functional requirement. Non-functional requirement. So let's quickly talk about them. So whenever we talk about non-functional requirement, it's like what's the untold product behavior, right? Which we have to understand from again from the experience perspective, right? So now, so first come first, when we talk about any of the like games, then probably especially any web app or any such application game, what comes to our mind is either that game is online or offline, which is very important, right? So you should always ask such question, which is going to help. Second, obviously when it is game, then probably you need more people to participate in that particular game, right? So either that is multiplayer or not, which is again very important. And whenever there is a multiplayer such kind of thing, then there is always some limit, right? How many maximum number of player basically it can play. So it can be a Ludo, going forward it can be Free Fire, it can be any such games that we have played or we are aware of. We should always talk about what is the maximum player that it can play depending on use cases. Third thing, performance matters a lot, especially for the games. If your users are not able to basically use your application, your gameplay without any interruption, then obviously they are not going to enjoy and they will move on. Accessibility, in terms of either they can basically use your application with the keyboard, right, with the navigation, with the gesture, how basically feasibly they can basically accessible your application, which is very important, right? So accessibility is on the other side. Then definitely question comes like what all platform we are going to support, right? Is it for the web, it is for the basically it is for the desktop, or basically it is for tablet, or it is for basically mobile? We have to ask these questions because accordingly we will make sure either we have to make it responsive and how much responsive we have to basically make it, right? Which is again very important. Responsiveness. Okay, then think about scenarios where this application grows, right? And there may be cases where people wanted to cheat because it's a game, right? Everyone wanted to cheat. How we can make sure our application is secure from the threats, from such cheatings, and definitely as it is online, there are so many ways to do that. But again, if we want to make it big, right? We wanted to take it global, then we have to also think about localization, which is very very important. And as the number and money, a lot of things will come into the picture. The internationalization is something that we should always think about. Now, as we talked about performance, multiple things come into the picture, like can we cache some of the stuff, like what need to be cached and what not need to be, can we use CDN for assets, like lot more thing. So basically, are we going to have some theming support, which is again a great feature, like for different people, different color themes can be there depending on how they wanted to pursue their game, which is again very good example. PWA, do we want to make it as an behave like an app, right, where you can duck it on your screen and basically you can start use it as an application altogether, right? We have to think about auth, which is very very important. Not just limited to that, you have to understand how things are going around in your application in the real world, right? So you have to think about the logging and monitoring, which is very very important. Now on top of it, there are certain things how people will get to know about it, right? That is SEO. Like you have to be sure you are doing the right search engine optimization so that more and more people can get to know about your application, which is very very important. Then there are certain cool features that you can think about, like voice support. Like people can basically do a chit chat in both the term, right? You can have a chat or you can have a voice where people are talking about, hey dude, what's up, any such conversation can happen. Then as it is a game, we should also think about, like, either we wanted to build in 2D or we wanted to build in 3D, which is again a very good question to basically ask from interviewer also, so that you have the right set of expectation, and interviewer also get to know you are thinking on a very broader level. It's not just about giving a problem statement and you are just thinking about the implementation. It's you are thinking about the right set of implementation, which is very very important. Then finally you talk about, do you want to discuss about the CI/CD pipeline also, right? Which is very important. It's not about building it but also shipping that product, and that too in a more stable and monitorable state, right? Which is very very good and cool thing. So these are the non-functional requirements that we have discussed. So let's dive into the other pieces of the system design. Let's talk about the HLD and the tech stack. So when you have to basically prepare the HLD, then you should always have these two things very handy, right? The things that we discussed in terms of the functional requirement and non-functional requirement, right? As an overview, in the functional requirement, yes, you need to create a board, you need a dice, you have a player, a snake, ladder, right? Then dice can basically roll and players can basically move. Lot more things in terms of the what is the expectation from the product. But again, non-functional requirement that we touched upon, online, offline, multiplayer, accessibility, and lot more things, right? So if you have those things handy, then deciding your high level design will be very very easy, and the decision making that you will be making based on the requirement, not on based on the assumptions or the things that you know, right? So now let's see what are the things that should come to your mind whenever you are planning basically about the high level design. Then we'll talk about the tech stack as well. First thing, which programming language basically we are going to use in order to develop the requirement or the snake ladder game. Second, as this is a game, right? Anytime when game comes, you have to always think, should I implement the game in a DOM, or should I use canvas basically for that, or basically can I use the SVG, especially when we are talking about the 2D game. Right now we are like considering it is a 2D game, not the 3D game. Hence you have to consider these things when you are going to take a decision, right? Then you have to think about depending on what you are using, what design system basically you are going to use, which is very important. Then what comes next is what library and framework basically you are going to use in order to build the application, which is again very very important. Okay, what comes next? Next comes basically once you are done with the library and framework, definitely you have to like manage multiple and complex state, right? For that, what state management and how you are going to do the state management is something which is very important and you should always consider. Okay, what's next? We talked about, as it is a game, then it can be real time, right? If it is a real time, then how you are going to support that real time is something which is very important. As we talked about, it can be offline as well, where you have it in your local and probably you wanted to play with a computer or you wanted to play with your friend, which is just sitting beside. Like in that particular case, you have to think about PWA, or you have to think about if there is a lot of computation basically which is done, right? Then probably you have to think about other options, like either I wanted to use like service worker for that, for a sake, right? Or you wanted to use web worker basically, maybe if you wanted to do some heavy computation of the game. So do you want to use these, right? Which should come to your mind. Then we talked about, you can say, localization and internalization. Do we want to use I18N, right? Which you have to basically think about. You have to think about what you are going to use for the instrumentation, right? Which is again very very important thing. So do you want to latch for some library, or you have some APIs already where you want to just raise the barrier request, and how you wanted to basically do that. Then do you wanted to set up a mono repo, which is existing repo where you wanted to build upon, or you wanted to set up a fresh repo and basically you wanted to configure everything in order to roll out your project, right? Do you want micro front end? Again, we might not go into the detail of the micro front end, but again, you have to thinking about the micro front end, something which is very important. Probably you wanted to use this game in any of the existing framework or the architecture, then probably this micro front end is something which may be helpful. Then how you are going to check the performance of your application, that monitoring of your performance is very very important. Thinking about that is again give you a next level, and which is very important. Then finally it comes about the how you are basically thinking about shipping it in terms of the CI/CD, or you can say build and deploy pipelines, right? Which is again very important. So if you have answer to these questions, probably you will be able to like dive into more detail, and you will be more confident about taking a decision based on the requirement, not based on what basically you know, just, right? Which is very very important. So like let's talk about what we can use basically in this particular application in terms of the tech stack. So let's get started. Let's talk about the answers to these problems, right? And obviously like what are the factors basically on which you should think. We may not dive into each and everything in more detail, but just a thought process about each and everything is just very important, especially in the interview, right? Okay, first come first in terms of programming, right? As we are going to use this in the browser basically, in that particular case, obviously the first preference that comes is a JavaScript as a scripting language, right? Now there can be other options like WebAssembly is basically coming into the picture. So many interesting things are going to happen, but again, right now, like we know, right, in browser the JavaScript is the best thing you can do. Okay, now in terms of the DOM, in terms of the canvas, in terms of the SVG, right? Although you can build the games in SVG, canvas and DOM, everything, but again, everything has a pros and cons. You have to understand if it is more about the scalability, vector designs and sort of thing, then SVG is something which is a good option. But when you have to do a lot of interactivity with lot of element, right, then canvas is something which is very preferred, and most of the browser based applications or games basically are basically built on the canvas, right? And DOM is something definitely it comes handy and you can do a lot more thing, but again, it becomes complicated when you have to do a lot more animation inside the main DOM. So it comes with the pros and cons, but probably as a part of this discussion, we can consider not going into the canvas in detail, because most of the folks may not be aware of that. Making it simple, if you are able to justify, it's okay, you can opt anything, but again, you should be knowing the differences and you should be able to justify whenever you are talking in the interview. Maybe we are going to take as a DOM so that we can dive in more detail about other thing. So now, design system, there are so many design system. Basically, if you talk about material design system is there, bootstrap is there, right? There are so many design system out. Then and design is there. There are so many things as we talked about, right? What design system basically we are going to use is something that should be justified based on what are the core component basically that you are getting out of box, what are the requirement that you have, and that you can leverage from those design system. If you can convince, that is like more than enough and good to have. Again, whenever you talk about library and framework, you should be able to justify in terms of why. It's not about just you knowing the library or the framework and working upon that. How your team basically understand that, right? Thinking in terms of the resources, thinking about the future, right? Everything's coming into the picture. Thinking about the requirement, right? Thinking about your competitor, how they are solving the problem, right? Everything's coming into the picture when you decide it. Maybe this time most of the folks as aware of, and like these things can be built in React as well. So going with the React as a discussion for this meeting or series. Yeah. So state management, if you have to talk about, there are so many options. Like people randomly talk about, I have used Redux, probably I will go with that. Or people who understand the challenges with the large scale application with the Redux, probably they may say they can use a context. Anything that you use basically or you talk about, you have to basically convince why you wanted to go with that, right? It's for me, it's good enough, like I can use React context in order to have this thing. Now, coming to the real time obviously comes with a lot of complexity and a lot of things. If you are able to understand, like WebSocket is something basically which can provide you like real time behavior, or basically if there is no two-way communication, you wanted to have one-way communication, then server side event is something which can be helpful. Now, PWA offline, definitely you can leverage that. Thinking about, do you want to use worker or service worker is something which is very important. Heavy computation, go with the web worker. Offline support, go with the service worker. You implement a PWA, right? Again, that is very cool and very important thing. Internationalization, one of the famous way to do that is I18N, right? Use that instrumentation. There are so many tools and so many libraries which can help you to do that, right? In order to track those data, there are so many backend system which can help you to basically monitor those dashboard. So those things, monorepo, you have to think about, like in terms of the setup, in terms of the cost, overall cost, those things come into the picture. Now, micro frontend, just don't go with the micro frontend. Just think about, do we really have the requirement for that, right? Do not talk about everything in the interview, that may be challenging, but again, if you can touch upon these things, it is very good, and at least showcase these are the things that comes to your mind when you think about the HLD or the tech stack, right? Because CI/CD pipeline, you can think about the GitHub actions, or any of these actions which are provided by either the Amazon, Microsoft, Azure, right? Anything. But again, are you able to think about that is something which is very important. So with this, just wanted to give you an overview. These are something which should come to your mind whenever you're thinking about a high level design or a tech stack. So your tech stack should be driven on the high level thinking. It should not be, I know this and I wanted to go with that. With this, let's dive into LLD as well. Wait. So there are a lot of questions sometimes, right? People who are full stack, or people who are very senior, right? There are certain times question. Talking just about the front end is more than enough or not, right? Is that important question? Okay, it's good if you are a early stage developer, then probably may not be having a good understanding of the backend works, right? But if you are a senior resource, then at least having a some fair understanding of the backend system is very important. So I will tell you a small thing. If someone is interested in knowing about the backend, and if you can showcase an overall picture of the backend as well, that is like hitting, or you like punching the, you can say, stone, or punching the diamond on the stone sort of thing, right? So let's go and see basically what we can discuss. So if you can give an overall picture to anyone in terms of how your overall architecture is going to work, is like awesome. Like you have a browser, you have a worker, you have a service worker. Inside browser you can do a state management, and there can be multiple service, right? How you are going to contact with your backend is like you have a ELB, and you have multiple services on the backend, like auth service, gaming service, telemetry in terms of monitoring, and internally it have a database connection where it can be SQL and NoSQL databases depending on the requirement, right? How they are basically connecting, how these are basically going to interact with each other. If you can showcase this high level understanding of microservices and ELBs and your databases, and if required some queues, right, that will be great. So no, don't go into the deeper, but at least showcase that you understand how end-to-end system works. That is something which is very important and very powerful if you are a senior resource. So go and try it out. And now let's go into the low-level design. Let's talk about that. When it comes to LLD, like low-level design, always start thinking in terms of the interfaces without jumping into the implementation, or without thinking about how I'm going to implement it, right? If you are able to think in terms of the interfaces, the things which are involved in this particular game or application or anything as a matter you are going to build, right, then that will make your life very easy. Also that will avoid the multiple iterations, and basically especially when you wanted to distribute the task between your, you can say, team or engineers. If you know what need to be done, then that makes life very easy. Let's understand this in more detail, right? That will help you to basically dive and get more power of the low level design in the interfaces. Okay, in this particular interface, right, if we have to talk about the interfaces of the snake ladder game, what are the things that comes to your mind? What are the different entities which are involved in this, right? Let's think about that. First, definitely you need a dice. Like there's a game you play, you are playing the game using the dice, right? There are things like you have a snake, right? What do you have? Other thing that you can see, one thing you can see, there is a ladder as well, right? What else we can see? We can see there is a player as well, like there is a multiplayer, so there are players also in the game. Then what are the things basically which we can see over here is a board, right? You have a board. In that board you have multiple cells as well. I can say you have a board, and probably I can say there are multiple cells as well inside this board. Now what is the main thing. Like you see, these are the independent things basically which are there in your game, but how these things or interfaces are going to interact with each other is very important. So what we can do, we can use game interface, which will help to have the interactivity between the different items, entities that we see, and that will help our game to basically in a motion and working condition. Okay, with this, let's try to understand what are the different methods, or what are the different variables, or the things that will be available as a part of these interfaces, right? What are the things that we need? So let's understand, let's dive into that in more detail. So first of all, when we talk about our dice, do you want to store anything inside the dice? So when we say do you want to store anything in a dice, it meant what are the properties of dice that we are looking for? One, very important, one method which is required, which is I can roll the dice, right? Which is definitely, no doubt, a very important and powerful thing which is required over here. So I can write, I can roll a dice, which is again important. What else I can do? Anything that comes to your mind, probably that comes to your mind, I can store the value of the dice inside this. But again, why to store the value of the dice inside the dice interface, right? It doesn't make sense, because that value is something which will be used as a part of game, or someone else will be consuming it. Dice is like, you tell me, I will roll, I will give you a number, and then you just utilize it, nothing apart from that, right? So similarly, but when you are talking about the UI, or implementing that on the UI basically, then probably you may be thinking about, I wanted to have something called style properties, so that I can define some styles, I can make it more beautiful or interactive sort of thing. So that is something that you can definitely do using you can say style properties you can pass. Now coming to snake, right? What are the things that comes to your mind when we have to implement something like a snake? So maybe I can put it over here, I can get rid of this. Now snake has a start and snake has an end, which is very important, which is a pointer in a 2D array, right? So you have a start and you have a end, which is very important. Now what else basically is important over here? Style property is something which we can keep common among all the interfaces that we are going to talk about. So I'm just keeping it over here in order to, you can define the styles and whatnot. What else is important? You have a game. So in this game, probably depending on your start and end, you wanted to generate the snake, right? Maybe you wanted to use some image processing and something in order to generate your game. So generate snake, where you can definitely pass your start and end, and based on that basically you can generate a snake. Now you wanted to probably add this snake in this board, right? Which is again important, add a snake. Then what else you need? At any point someone wanted to ask, at this particular shell, do you have any snake, right? Which is very important. So if I say has a snake is something which is again a very important property, where I just wanted to check at any XY coordinate, is there any snake or not, right? If you are able to tell, then yes, that's what something is needed. Now say suppose I wanted to know, I am at that particular position, I got a snake, what is the next place where I will be landing into, right? If a snake bites me, basically what is the next position that I have? So probably that is the next position. Whenever you talk about I'm at this snake and what is my next position, that will give you the tail position, like where is 2 basically, where it ends, right? That is how basically you can leverage your snake. Similarly, same sort of properties will be for your ladder as well, right? When we say ladder, it has a start, it has an end. Instead of generate the snake, it can be ladder. But yeah, people may be thinking, I can have something which is common between the snake and ladder. Yes, you can basically create something common between the snake and ladder instead of creating these two interfaces, which is fair enough. But in order to have a better understanding, I'm keeping it separate so that we can easily understand what is going around over here, right? So these are some interfaces that we defined related to the dice, snake and ladder. Now it's time for, you are a player, right? What are the properties of a player basically we wanted? Let's think about that. Player can have some of the properties, like let's again copy paste for the simplicity. Player can have some user information as a player information, basically we can say. Based on that, we may wanted to show some location of that user, right? Some language related stuff, anything basically that user may contain, the name of the user, right? any nickname or any sort of gaming name that people wanted to use, right? Anything can be used for in terms of user info. What is next? So if you are a player, at what position basically you are, so which is your current position is very important. Any time I wanted to know where this player is, basically I can get that property from the current position, which is very important. What's next is the status, right? When we say about status, why this matters, there can be multiple statuses, like a player can be in an active state, or it can be in inactive state, like he went offline or anything happened basically, right? There can be active or inactive player. There can be other statuses also, but to make it simple, maybe there are multiple statuses that we wanted to play around. Now what we have, as we said, we can maybe style any of these interfaces, so keeping our style property as in common among all the interfaces, which you can inherit also by making a another style component, leveraging that to all of them. But for sake of simplicity, keeping it like separate so that we can leverage that. Now I think using this player interface, we have more than enough information for a player, and that is more than sufficient as if now. What else we need, right? So probably now talking about the board, right? As we talked about, there are certain things in the board which is very important, right? What is the very important thing, which is the size of the board, right? I wanted to know like how big this board is. Either that is 100 column board, or it is like 36 in this particular case, because that will be my finishing point and that will be my like winner point, right? There can be such thing. Now other thing, if we see, which is very important in terms of the game, which is direction, right? If you see, the first row goes from left to right, but the second row goes from right to left. So something is the direction. If someone at any shell basically, it can tell me in which direction basically I will be floating, then that is again going to be very important. But again, before going to the direction, let's talk about the property of the board only. Second property, second method which is required basically, which is move to next position, right? If I tell you I'm at this position, I got this number, can you help me to move to the next position or not, right? I give you XY coordinate, and basically I give you URL cell, you already have like on which position you are. You have to just tell me, if I'm giving you the number which is dice number, you just tell me, dude, what is the next position I should go. Although it seems to be very simple implementation where I have to just do a addition, but moving this responsibility to the board is something where we are saying our business logic at a right place, which is very important. Now we talked about board, but again there are certain things which are related to shell as well, which is very important. As we said, the direction is very important. Either a person on a position number 10 or 3 will move in the right direction or the left direction, if someone can tell, right? That can help us to get the animation in future. It can also help us to derive lot of properties, right? So keeping that direction is as a separate is going to be very important for us. And as I said, there can be style property basically which can be kept as in common. Now comes a very interesting and very important part over here, which is your game, right? As we said, game is something which is going to be used across. So let's make some space for our game. Okay, now I'm making the space for game. What comes to your mind basically when we talk about any game? Maybe let's talk about some of the properties which is very important. Has the game started or not, right? Has the game finished or not? Is the game basically scheduled or not, right? Is the game paused or active? There can be anything. What I meant by what is the state of the game, which is very important. And these state can be multiple. Either that is active, either that is paused, or someone might have scheduled, let's play the game at this particular time or this particular day, right? Or it is a finished game. It can be anything, right? There are multiple states basically where a game can be. Now another very important property is like who is the active player, right? There are multiple players in the board in the game basically, but who is the active player is something which is a very important factor of this game. Definitely we have a player, and there can be other properties like how many number of players we need, right? Based on that number of players, we can generate multiple instances of the player as well, right? Which is again very important. Other thing that comes to our mind, which is what is the max duration. If this is a time boxed game, right? Where the maximum game time for this particular game is, say, suppose 40 minutes or 1 hour, right? That is the maximum duration. Probably we wanted to keep it as a separate thing, right? Now, one important thing is something which is probably who is the winner, right? Every game has a winner. Then we wanted to keep that winner property in the game itself, right? What else come to our mind basically whenever we think about a game, right? When we are playing a game, then definitely there will be some method or something. Again, one thing which is very important: can we keep a map of our snake and ladder over here, which will help us to basically make certain decisions? What are those? I will talk about why didn't we keep the snake and ladder inside our board instead of keeping at a game level, right? We will talk about that as well, which is very important, especially keeping this map of snake and ladder at a game level, not at a board level or a cell level, which has an importance, which we'll talk. Now, other things, like definitely I wanted to play this game, right? I wanted to start this game, which is very important. At any point I wanted to basically move to the next position. Okay, this is something which is already there inside a board. Then why basically we are talking about like why we wanted to have this logic over here as well, like move to next position. Over here there are multiple business logic that come into the picture. One important, definitely on which number you are, what dice number you got basically. Based on that you have to make a decision, what is my next. But what happens once you reach to the next position? You got a like ladder, or you got a bite from a snake, right? This method will encrypt or abstract all the, you can say, complex logic and the rules basically internally, that will help you to basically get you the final next position, right? That, which is very important. Now there can be other things like check winner, like who is the winner. I just wanted to check at any point, is something which is provided by this game, which will internally do some logic, check the player position and check what is the size of the board. Based on that it will basically give you the final, either you are a winner or not. These are something which is very important. If you think about, if you are able to derive the properties and the method which are required by these interfaces, then your life is going to be very easy when you dive into the component, or not just component, when you actually dive into the API implementation as well. Irrespective of either you are front end or the back end engineer, if you are able to derive these interfaces, trust me, any sort of application in any language or any framework, you will be able to derive it very easily. But before jumping into the API or the component implementation or thinking about that, we just talked about like why we kept this map and snake and ladder game over here, the property over here, right? So now this is very important. So take an example, if we enrich or embed this information with this board or cell, and if I say there is certain rules or certain way where your board get refreshed after like 5 minutes, right? Every 5 minutes your snake and ladder position will get automatically changed. In that particular case you have to think, right? If it is like 100 by 100 grid, right, it's huge, and you have like 10-15 snake and ladder around this huge board. Every time after 5 minutes you have to regenerate this board, which is of no use, because board have certain properties which is not going to change the number and the direction and lot more thing, right? But if we embed this information of the player or information of this snake and ladder, then yes, every time you change, you have to basically iterate, find out those things, refresh and do lot more things. And these comes with a cost when you talk about the UI, right? You have to think about those. If you separate out this information to a different layer, then that makes very life easy for everything, and that also helps you to, in terms of the optimization and performance. So every time when you think about any interfaces, you also think about what data structure probably, or how keeping that information can leverage you to basically get better performance, right? Better optimization, like how you can basically look after, or you can read and write can be optimized, right? If you keep those thought process whenever you are basically thinking about the interfaces, definitely just trust me, that's going to be awesome. And if you represent that knowledge during the interview, it's like anything, trust me, it's going to be another level. So let's talk about the benefit of the interfaces going forward. Before we jump into the uses of the component, or you can say the inside the API, right? Let's talk about, this is very important, which is design pattern. Like before we even think about implementation, if you know what design pattern you are going to leverage, just use those interfaces with respect to your design pattern, and trust me, either you are building application in JavaScript, think about the pattern that you are going to use, which is object oriented pattern or observer, factory, builder, whatever pattern you are going to use. If you can think about that pattern and leverage those interfaces, trust me, it's going to be awesome. Or even like if you are building something in React.js, right? Think about presentational component, which we leverage a lot, like or HOC, provider context, right? How you wanted to manage your state, how you wanted to leverage these interfaces is something which is very important. Similarly, hooks, right? There are so many things. Basically, if you can combine your knowledge of your design pattern and the interfaces, trust me, it's going to be awesome. Just give a thought before actually starting your code. What design pattern can help you to achieve the things in a better way or better, you can say, form, right? It's going to be like awesome for you. Now let's talk about, if you have these interfaces and you have to define the components. Like anyone talks about what are the components that you need in order to design this snake and ladder game, how you can easily answer using these interfaces. Let's quickly see about it. Let's someone ask like how you can define multiple components for this. What comes to your mind? Okay, as we have defined interfaces, we can leverage that knowledge very easily. What we need a game component. Yes, something like game component. Internally we need other component. Maybe I need this time a board component. I have a board. Inside that board there can be multiple shells as well, right? These are the other components probably I need. What are the other components that we need, right? We talked about we can keep this player and all sort of things inside the board, but we can abstract that and keep outside as well. It depends on us, right? We can talk about like we can have a player component which is outside. We can have other component like we talked about. We have snake component, we have ladder component, we have dice component, right? There are so many things. Now life becomes very easy, right? And if someone talks about like what props or how you wanted to manage the states, what are the methods you wanted to keep in each of these component, how you wanted to do your state management, those are the properties in terms of like methods that you need in each of these interfaces. You can easily leverage where that method should be kept, right? Which is again the power of the interfaces. You have everything on the plate or in front of you. It's more about you have to just think what is the right place in terms of the design pattern that you are going to use, right? That's it. As simple as, like, why not think about the interfaces first before actually writing any of the thing in terms of the component, right? Now leverage the same knowledge when we are building the APIs or when you are having a contract for your APIs as well, right? In terms of implementation, if someone asks you like, can you tell me some of the APIs that you need? Now, although the method that we talked about, most of the method you can write in the front end itself, or all of the method you can write in the back end as well, right? There is no harm. Like you can expose all those methods using the API and you can get it done. But again, if you have to build something very smart, you have to think about who should own the responsibilities. It's not about who can build that. Both of them can build, right? It's more about thinking in more better terms in terms of the performance, in terms of the security, right? Lot more things come into the picture when you have to decide the responsibilities in terms of who should own what. Now the same thing comes with the API. If someone have to ask like what sort of API basically you need, it's very easy, right? You can just say I wanted to have a create board API, right? I can have other APIs, like there should be API where if there is a new player, add player API, right? If there can be other sort of APIs like I wanted to start game. There can be other sort of APIs that comes, which is I wanted to roll the dice and I wanted to get a new number, right? There can be other APIs basically which gives you maybe what is the next player, right? It gives you detail about the who's going to play next. There can be other properties like maybe check winner, right? The API gives you the who's the winner. Similarly, you can decide what method, either that is get, post, basically depending on the thing. Similarly, you can think about like what will be the body, what will be the response you need in these APIs, because you know what are the attributes or what are the parameters which are basically required in those interfaces, right? That makes your life very easy when you have to think about the APIs or any level, anywhere you wanted to leverage those interfaces, right? So start thinking about those things, which is very, 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 very important. What are the things that you should keep in mind when building these things, right? It's not just limited, you have written a HLD LLD. There are so many things that should come out of box, like when you are implementing things. One is like, as we talked about, using the right set of data structure is very important. Like some people may say why we need that, right? In the front end, why even we care about the data structure? We just saw keeping the property at a cell level or a game level can change the performance altogether, right? Converting into the map or keeping into the list can be another level game changer. So always think about what is the right set of data structure where my read and write can be more optimized, right? It's not about I can write a loop and I can write a filter and I can get my job done. It's not just limited to that, right? Which is very, very important. Then some of the challenging thing, how you can have the snake motion. When I say snake motion, at the bottom basically you will be moving from left to right, and then at the next level from right to left, right? You move in the zigzag way where how the snake basically moves, right? How you can implement that. Now it's another, like it's another problem statement that generally asked in the data structure, right? Can you print the numbers in the snake motion or the zigzag motion and whatnot? Again, it's not a data structure, it's normal problem solving that you see use case in the real world as well, right? What if I say you have to also have an animation, like you move, you have tick 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 tick. Whenever you move from 1 to 5, you actually don't swap immediately, or you just don't vanish the player from one place to the other place. You also wanted to show that motion, that movement also, like when it is getting bite from a snake and you wanted to basically slide from the snake, right? If you wanted to have those animation, how you can achieve that, right? Think about those things, which is again the next level and more challenging. Think about what if someone clicks the button multiple times in order to roll the dice, right? What will happen? Or someone clicked on the start game button multiple times, what will happen? How we can basically handle that, right? So think about those use cases that we have heard a lot of time in terms of the debounce, right? See how we can leverage those techniques or the methods that we know, right? Think about the security. Think about in terms of the security, thinks about cross-site scripting, right? Thinks about the cross-site request forgery. Think about in the middle attack. Think about the DDoS attack. There are so many things that happens, right? Think about the course. So what are the things that basically you can think in terms of this, having the security in your application when you're building a real world game or real world application? If you can think about those things, trust me, this is going to be give you a next level. So just go think about these things whenever you are basically building any of the application. And if you can showcase these things and your thought process in the interview, trust me, you are going to rock in your interview. Let's quickly talk about the future scope, like in terms of what if we have to make this application more powerful, or we have to add more use cases, how that the interfaces, the thing that we discussed, can be flexible enough in order to accommodate. If you can think about, right, if I make this problem statement more complex, like you can have multiple dice. Now instead of playing with one dice, you have two dices basically, where you can get a number from 2 to 12, right? Or if I say there is a rule basically where you can keep on rolling the dice if you get a 6, and if there are multiple consecutive 6, in terms of 3 consecutive 6, you get your the player, the chance will be cancelled, right? Again, what if I say the snake and ladder positions keep on refreshing after every 5 minutes, right? Think about those scenarios, think about these interesting problems, try to come up with some interesting solution. I hope you will have something fruitful. And if you get some solutions for these, don't forget to write in the comment. I will be happy to read those things, or share it with your friend some challenging thing that you have in your. Okay, here we comes to the end of the video. I hope you learn and enjoyed like building the snake and ladder game together, having a system design in terms of high level and low level design. So if you really enjoyed it, don't forget to like, share and subscribe, and comment your thought about it, right? If you like the approach, don't forget to comment and share your views on that. So with this, thank you for watching this, and keep watching Chakde System Design, and see you in the next episode. Thank you.